Frankie? All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm gonna have to get my teacher voice out pretty soon. Thank you so much for everyone for coming. It has been such an inspiring morning already, and many, many more stories of expeditions and exploration to come. My name is Trevor Wallace. I've been lucky enough to be the Vice President of Research and Education for about 5 years now. And this is an incredible program that I inherited from my predecessor, Julie Chase, I think is somewhere out in the crowd, who taught me much about how to facilitate our many different grant programs, which you're going to learn about today, and not just the programs, but the explorers themselves. And I remember myself as a grantee walking into this building and feeling like, wow, is there anything left to explore? You're kind of taken aback. You sip your tiki drink at the bar and you just think, wow, you see that plaque of all the famous firsts. But I think once you start to talk to the other explorers, you hear about the stories of the planned expeditions that they have that they're going on, next month, next week, tomorrow. You start to understand that exploration and understanding this beautiful planet we're lucky to live on is happening every single day. And I think that we find there's so much left to explore, but there's even more that's left to protect once we understand it. And I can't think of a better group of people than our grantees to share about that. Amongst our presentations, we do have some horsemen of the apocalypse, a doomsday glacier in Antarctica. We have these expeditions that are helping us understand animal species doing things that you think only humans could do, such as chimpanzee medicine, such as Capuchin monkeys using tools. So I won't spoil it too much, but I can say for myself, the Explorers Club and the Explorers Club Grants program changed my life. And it really opened these doors to curiosity, and it gave me a chance to connect with this amazing community that we have. And when I became VP, there wasn't a grantee symposium, and I realized, oh my God, we're sending hundreds of explorers out into the field every year, but so many of them never get to come to this incredible place. So if you think about it, and forgive me, there are going to be many corny jokes that I'm going to tell today. If a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear it? And if they didn't, it probably fell on an explorer. I'm going to be introducing each one of our grantees and then several of our programs. But the first one that I want to introduce is the Delta Willis Award, which will be described a little bit more by Mary Jo Kinzer, who's come to talk about her dear friend Delta. Mary Jo, there are many documentary filmmakers, including myself, who are part of the club, but not many of them who have 8 Emmys and have done work on Mount Everest, the Colca Canyon, the deepest canyon in the world, orcas in the Johnson Strait, the list goes on. Mary Jo has been a member for many years and helped us put together this incredible award amongst many other of our grants. This one is a new one and just in the spirit of her friend Delta that you're just about to learn about more now. So Mary Jo.
Noticing I'm not tall. It's wobbly. I'm gonna come on skis. Good afternoon. I am thrilled and honored to announce, this is gonna choke me up because Delta was a very dear friend of mine who passed 2 years ago and asked that we do this. I'm thrilled and honored to announce the newly established Delta Willis Rising Explorer Award. A longtime member of the Explorers Club, she was a journalist, author, conservationist, and adventurer. Delta was named after the place where she was born, a small Arkansas town of 300 set amidst woods, fields, and streams in the Mississippi Delta. Like many of the Rising Explorer recipients, she was fascinated by nature. Delta wrote for a range of publications, including Audubon, Outside, and Natural History. As an author, she was brilliant at presenting scientific concepts in a way the reader could appreciate. In The Sand Dollar and the Slide Rule, she explored the relationship between natural forms and human engineering, and the beauty, economy, and efficiency in the way birds fly, fish swim, and trees grow. She introduced young people to the world's most renowned paleontologists in the Leakey family and profiled the work of Richard Leakey and Donald Johanson in the Hominid Gang. Once when asked to sum herself up in a word, she replied, creative, then added, but I always have a habit of thinking logic will prevail. Maybe you can relate. Like many of you, Delta possessed enormous vision. Despite her small town upbringing, she had big dreams, and she made those dreams come true. Her wish was to inspire young explorers and to help make their dreams come true. By funding the Delta Willis Rising Explorer Grant, she will be doing just that. The first ever inaugural Delta Willis Rising Explorer Grant will be awarded to John Sanare from Arusha, Tanzania. John's project will explore human impact on elephant habitat and movement patterns in the highly threatened Kitandini Wildlife Corridor. It's the only wildlife corridor linking Kilimanjaro National Park in Tanzania and Amboseli National Park in Kenya. This project aim is to understand those human-elephant conflicts and their causes, identify the areas of conflicts, and propose mitigation measures. Between 2009 and 2022, it is estimated that 50,000 elephants were killed in Tanzania, and not just for their ivory, but due to habitat conversion, human settlements, livestock grazing, and logging. This project will propose land use planning methods to mitigate these issues while endeavoring to understand elephant migratory patterns, monitor their movements amid agricultural fields. Insights gained from this study will be used to implement conservation, education, and awareness initiatives within the communities to promote coexistence and management of the corridor through the community involvement. This initiative is especially meaningful as one of the elephants in the Amboseli Elephant Research Project is named for Delta, and her ashes are spread around the park. So Delta's spirit will definitely be with John. The next Delta Willis Rising Explorer Grant is awarded to Maimuna Juf from the University of Gambia. Her project will provide data on the slender-snouted crocodile in the Gambia stretch of the Tambi Wetland Complex. A critically endangered species endemic to West Africa, the slender-snout crocodile is one of the world's rarest and least studied crocodilians. It's a top priority edge species and is threatened by habitat loss, illegal hunting, and reduced prey availability. Maymuna's study will document population distribution and nest breeding sites. It will involve interactions with local hunters and interviews with key informants to understand the major causes of species decline in the area. The project will then create a citizens' initiative to monitor the species population and the nesting sites. She will mount an awareness campaign for local school children and teachers and work with local communities to effect attitudinal change. The final Delta Willis Rising Explorer grant for 2024 is awarded to Kirtan Pandit from Tribhuvan University in Pokhara, Nepal. His project will provide research and data collection on the Chinese pangolin in the Sindhupalchik district. This study will assess population size, distribution pattern, status, and habitat preference, along with the impact of human activities on pangolins in the area. These unique and elusive creatures are in peril due to diminished attention, habitat destruction, and poaching. They are among the world's most trafficked and endangered species globally, and the study area is a hub for Chinese pangolin trade to China. By providing baseline research and identifying key threats, Kirtan's project will continue the formulation of conservation policies and strategies and lead to more informed decision-making as it relates to law enforcement. We congratulate John, Maymuna, and Kirtan and wish them all the best in their new endeavors. As Delta would say, thrive on.
So what an incredible tribute to Delta and exploration. Well, I want to jump straight into our grantee presentations. The first program that I want to introduce is our Rising Explorer Grant, which is funded by the Youth Activity Fund, which has been around for over half a century. Over the years, the grants have become more and more competitive. This year had 1,500 applications for our 9 different programs. So these really are the cream of the crop. And without further ado, I want to introduce Laura Monroe from Glasgow University, not only doing her work on Arctic foxes in eastern Iceland, she's also the president of the Exploration Society at Glasgow University. So, Madam President.
So hi everyone, thank you Trevor for the introduction. So my name is Laura and I'm going to be talking about my research on Arctic foxes with the support of the Rising Explorer grant. So a bit about my background. So I am from Scotland in the United Kingdom and I was born in a town called Aberdeen in the northeast and I now live in Glasgow in the Central Belt. So I've always thought of myself as a massive animal lover, and back in 2017, I got my first taste of conservation, volunteering with Global Vision International for a month in rural Thailand on their elephant project. So that led me to, a few years later, applying for a degree in zoology at the University of Glasgow, and I am now in my final year, set to graduate in June, and I've absolutely fallen in love with the field. My particular interests are behavioral ecology and human-wildlife conflict. So last year, I was very lucky to be given the opportunity through the Exploration Society to lead an expedition to conduct research for 6 weeks in eastern Iceland. So I led a team of 5 other students, and we had different projects, but mine was focusing on Arctic foxes. So my topic was looking at the spatial and temporal dietary variation between dens of Arctic foxes. So a little bit about background. So Arctic foxes are ecosystem engineers, which means they create really important habitat for other species, such as birds and insects and mammals. They are also sensitive to climate change, and they are currently an IUCN flagship climate change species. So overall, the populations are not endangered globally, but that isn't the whole picture. In Russia and Fennoscandia, we have some critically endangered populations that are down to 40 individuals. Now, Iceland represents a really unique population of Arctic foxes. So normally Arctic foxes eat rodents, but on Iceland, there aren't any rodents. So instead, the Arctic foxes have become really good at eating seabirds. Now, this poses a problem because seabirds, of course, are diminishing because of climate change. So actually, Arctic foxes are hunted in Iceland every year to manage seabird populations. But despite this, they are still a very stable population. So why is studying diet important? So diet is a fundamental aspect of any species survival, and it's really important to do baseline data so that we can monitor changes on both temporal and spatial scales over time as climate change potentially impacts this. And the research that I have done, hopefully it will help maybe inform future conservation management, both in Iceland and beyond, for seabirds and Arctic foxes. So my questions were, what are the Arctic foxes eating? Has this changed over time? And does the location of their den affect what they hunt? So just briefly about the expedition location. So I was staying in the Far East in a town called Seyðisfjörður at an independent research centre called Skálanes, run by Dr. Olaf Peterson. And you can see the location on the red marker in the map. So expeditions from Glasgow Uni have been running since 2008, and we have really great connections with Oli over there. This is a photo of my expedition team and Oli. So we were made up of different zoology students from different year groups, because a huge part of this is about teaching skills between years, and also a geology student. So Skálanes is really unique because it hosts a super healthy population of lots of seabirds, such as black-legged kittiwakes, northern fulmars, Atlantic puffins, and eider ducks. And every year, it also is home to one family of Arctic foxes. And here is an Arctic fox den and some footprints I found as well. And it is also important to mention that due to the seabird colonies there, Arctic foxes are hunted in the area, and also Skálanes does some ethical harvesting of eider down, so there is also stakeholder investment in managing foxes. So my methods. So I was there for 6 weeks, and basically my days were spent hiking around the mountains looking for dietary evidence of foxes. So this included searching for bones, looking for fox scat. And if you're wondering how to ID fox scat, there is different ways, such as size and shape, but a lot of times a good old-fashioned sniff does the job. That is true, I really did sniff a lot of fox poo. So I also set up camera traps in the hope of catching a glimpse of the elusive animal, and I spent many, many hours in the lab dissecting fox scat and IDing fox bones. So what did I find? So I overall found 5 fox dens in the area. This map here denotes the dens with the green triangles. And I found that they were different ages and different distances from the hunting grounds. So 4 of them were actually older dens that weren't active recently, but I actually managed to find one active fox den, and with my own eyes, I saw a family of Arctic foxes, which was amazing. So overall, I did find that their diet is very similar to other studies in Iceland. So this bar plot here, on the x-axis, we have location of den, and on the y, we have the different kind of components of diet. So they were eating a lot of seabirds, but I did find evidence as well of some insects, some vegetation, and some eggshells. And overall, I did find that they had a preference for large, slow-moving birds, in particular puffins, eiders, and fulmars. This graph here just shows the different species at the different dens I found. And overall, I did find that different prey was consumed at the different dens. But overall, over the years, consistently, they were eating the same species. So that's good news for now. It means that they have a stable food source. However, that is likely to change as climate change impacts the seabird populations in Iceland. And I also found that the Arctic foxes have a very opportunistic style of hunting. They were essentially just eating whatever they came across, and they weren't specializing at all. So that's good news in terms of protecting the seabirds. It means that conservation initiatives such as maybe putting some sort of barrier between the seabirds and the foxes, like electric fences, might actually be enough to stop the foxes eating any species of needing protection. So the camera traps were also a success, and I got incredible footage of 4 baby Arctic foxes and their dad. I was very lucky for a first-time camera trapper. So the next slide shows maybe a harder part of the story. So unfortunately, 3 weeks into my expedition, the local hunter went and harvested the adult male fox, so the kits were left with no parents. So still, to this day, I don't know if they survived. Potentially one did, because we did kind of see evidence of them starting to hunt already. And I just wanted to bring this up to show that fieldwork is tough. It doesn't always go to plan. Situations arise that you're not prepared for, but overall it really helps to foster resilience and determination in the field. And my expedition team were so supportive during this time, and I couldn't have got through it without them. And also to just highlight that conservation is really complex. A lot of the times you have to make really hard decisions about potentially protecting one species and culling another. So the next steps for the research. So I used the data to write my final undergraduate dissertation, and all the research will be shared with Scalanes and the University of Glasgow to help inform future conservation or other projects. I also did collect a lot of data on parasites too, which unfortunately I didn't have time to study, so that will be passed on for other students to look at. And with the camera trap footage, I did get over 1,500 photos and videos, so it was about 12 hours of footage, but we passed on for someone to do a behavioral study. So the impacts of the Rising Explorers grant. So overall, the expedition and the grant has really helped to develop my research and teamwork skills. I did also some really great presentations in the local community in Iceland to give the local Icelandic people maybe a different take on Arctic foxes, to see that maybe they are worth protecting. And it really helped to build my resilience in the hard situations I had to deal with. And it's kind of confirmed that I really do think a career in research and exploration is for me. So since the expedition, as Trevor said, I am currently the president of the Exploration Society at the University of Glasgow. So I've been sharing my knowledge and training new expedition teams to undertake research this summer. I also got to spend 2 weeks in Kenya in November studying animal abundance and the links with vegetation cover. I've got a scientific internship lined up this summer looking at enriching enclosure design at a local zoo and citizen science initiatives. And finally, I have gotten a place in September to do a research master's in ecology and environmental biology at Glasgow. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you to all the supporters of this research, especially the Explorers Club, who single-handedly supported me the most in my research. Also to my amazing expedition team, Lila, Emma, Rosie, and Abby, who I couldn't have done all my lab work without them. Also to my supervisors, Dr. Victoria Patterson and Dr. Olaf Peterson, and also to you all here today, who's allowed me this amazing opportunity to share my research. And just before I end and welcome questions, I would like to share one of my favorite camera trap footage. Thank you so much.
So we can take 1 or 2 questions. 1 or 2 questions for Laura. Maybe 1 question out there.
Amazing work. Thanks
you.
for being here and sharing that with us. Just curious what the local perception on the foxes are. They're just seen as pests, and how did you kind of see the difference after your presentation?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, unfortunately, Arctic foxes in Iceland are essentially how we would maybe see rats, vermin, unfortunately, and that's just due to a misconception that started like hundreds of years ago, where the local people thought that the Arctic foxes were killing sheep, and obviously then impacting farmers' income. But I don't know if you've seen the size of Arctic foxes. They're about 3 kilos, so there's no way they're taking down huge sheep. So this is kind of continued present day, and most Icelandic people are maybe not a fan of Arctic foxes, but once I did the presentation, Dr. Olaf Peterson, who I worked with, he then had some really great chats with locals, and they kind of started to see that potentially Arctic foxes are something that's really important to look at, and especially at the moment, before they become really endangered, we need to understand them so we can protect them in the future. Yeah, thanks. Great, thank you.
So the next program and grantee that I want to introduce is with the Exploration Fund, which funds our doctorate and postdoctorate researchers. And what I love about conservation biologists, we're going to meet a few today, is that they work almost a little bit like detectives. Detectives say follow the money, but in this case it seems like it's like follow the poo. Really excited. This is an incredible program that is managed by our consulting director, Rebecca Martin. We'll hear from more later, but she does an incredible job reviewing and bringing on these grantees. We have Frankie doing work on the California Coast Coyote project with some really interesting findings. Without further ado, Frankie.
Oh, it's wobbly. Is this good? Standing? Can you see me? Okay, awesome. Hi, my name is Frankie Garrity, and I'm a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow and a PhD student at the University of California in Santa Cruz. Thanks to Laura for your great talk, and I'm glad to be following up with another project which involves collecting a lot of carnivore scat. And also, I just want to say a huge thank you to you all for being here, and to the Explorers Club for funding this work, and also for bringing me here to speak to you all. As my title slide hints at, I have the unique privilege of studying some amazing carnivores that live both on land and in the ocean, and I get to study what happens when these species interact. But first, I think it's important to provide something of a historical perspective. So this painting is by an artist named Laura Cunningham, and it's from her book called A State of Change. And in the book, she paints the landscapes of California prior to Russian and European colonization. And in this painting specifically, she shows a bunch of California grizzly bears and a diverse array of birds feasting on a beach-cast gray whale carcass in what is now Berkeley, California. And I really like this photo, not only because it shows a cool interaction between marine and terrestrial mammals, but also because it provides a potent reminder of the ways that the landscape where I live in coastal California has changed over the last several hundred years. So grizzlies are now extinct in California, and populations of gray whales have been decimated across the Pacific coast and are now only a fraction of what they once were. But despite those somewhat bleak outlooks, in many cases, marine mammals in particular are demonstrating really remarkable population recoveries and range expansions following conservation efforts. So it's not just whales that are doing quite well along the Pacific coast, but also many other marine mammals like elephant seals and sea otters. And I'm particularly interested in northern elephant seals. So elephant seals are cool. They're these amazing, huge animals. They're bigger than your car, and they spend most of their life out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, diving down to the deep sea and feeding on squids and fishes. But once a year, they come back to land and they aggregate at a few very specific beaches along the West Coast. And at these beaches, they breed and they give birth, and we call them rookeries. So it's pretty hard to be an elephant seal in the wild, and it's natural that when they all aggregate at these rookeries, many of the adults end up dying from natural causes. And in addition, elephant seal pups often don't survive past 1 or 2 months old, and so all of this death means that these rookeries become hotspots of carcass availability on the shoreline. And these carcasses then are a super big and nutrient-rich food source for a diverse array of coastal scavengers, and coyotes in particular. They're my favorite. So we no longer have grizzly bears along the California coast, but we do have coyotes. And in my somewhat biased opinion, they're just as charismatic as the grizzly bears, if not more. So my research focuses on figuring out how important are seals as a food source for coastal coyotes. And I am examining these questions using a diverse array of non-invasive tools. So some of those tools include camera traps, like what you see on the left. They're these motion and heat-triggered cameras that will set up on beaches with and without pinniped rookeries and document coyote movement and behavior, and also a collection of scat. And with these scats, we're sequencing DNA within the scat to figure out what are the species that are present, and from that we can figure out the main contributors to coyote diets in areas with and without huge aggregations of seals. So a lot of this research is currently ongoing, and one of the most exciting findings so far, hopefully you can get a glimpse of this and it's not too dark, but one of our exciting findings is that coyotes are not just scavenging seal carcasses, but in some cases they're also killing newborn harbor seal pups, which is a different species of seal that lives on the California coast. And in this video, you'll hopefully see it on the left if it's not cropped out, but you can see a coyote dragging a freshly killed harbor seal pup onto the screen and then taking its head off, which is something that we've noticed in a lot of these predation events. It's currently the harbor seal pupping season right now, so just on Tuesday I was out on some beaches putting out cameras, and we're hard at work to try and figure out how common this never before documented predator-prey interaction is, what is the geographic extent of this species interaction, and also what are some of the ecological consequences, both for the coyotes and also for the seals. Hopefully you're seeing a little bit of that. But with that, I want to say a huge thank you to all of my funders. As a self-funded PhD student, none of this work would have been possible without all of these people, including the Explorers Club. And I also want to say a huge thank you to my amazing team of collaborators and students who I get to spend a lot of time with walking on beaches along the coast. And with that, I may have time for a question.
Thank you for the presentation. It's great. Was great. So, what is the interaction between them when they are alive? Like, are the coyotes approaching the sea lions when they are alive? I mean, you know what I mean? Like the behavioral interaction. Have you seen?
Yeah. It depends a lot by species. So the elephant seals, as you saw in my title slide, they're huge animals, and they do not care at all. When a mother-pup combination, like a pair, are together, the mothers will sort of aggressively defend the pups from coyotes, but only when the coyotes come within about a foot or two away from the pups. With harbor seals, it's a bit different because they're a lot smaller. So it depends based on species.
Hi, thanks. Great talk. So with coyotes, like where I live in Cape Cod, I'm surrounded by some conservation land, and you hear them howling at night and hunting in packs. So I'm wondering, are they hunting and not hunting in packs and have different behavior, or what's the population like to determine whether they're, singling? There's singles, individuals who are hunting by themselves.
Yeah, so speaking specifically to our evidence that coyotes are hunting harbor seal pups, we've seen both single coyotes and also sets of two. And so based on that, that's sort of across a few dozen observations, it's never been more than two that are hunting these pups.
all of our grantees are so humble about their findings too, because so many of these things are newly described to science. So that's something that I'm so proud of our different programs, which are enabling these researchers to do completely novel observations of these species that we all think we know so well, and right in the backyard of many of us who have connections to California. The next program that I'm really excited to present to you all is the Fjallraven Field Grant. So this is one of the very competitive programs that we have. In fact, it's about less than 1% acceptance rate. So we're always looking at ways to fund more explorers because these are really, really incredible. Ryan Helkowski is doing an incredible project in South Africa on mega carcasses. And these environmental engineers that are not only affecting their environment while they're living, but affecting them after death. So without further ado, Ryan.
All right, awesome. So my name is Ryan, and I'm going to be talking to y'all today about dead elephants. Put more elegantly, it's the ecological legacy effect of terrestrial megacarcasses, which just means I'm studying dead elephants. And so this research took place in Kruger National Park. To set this a bit, Kruger National Park is about twice the size of Yellowstone. It's about the same landmass as New Jersey. And I worked in conjunction with all of this through Sand Parks. And before I go into the project itself, I want to give some background on myself. So I am a PhD student at Utah State University. I'm also married, and my wife is right there. Hi, babe. She didn't know this photo was going to be here, but I really wanted to do that. In addition to being a great husband, I was also a high school science teacher for almost a decade in Baltimore. I've studied wetland microplastics, mostly for funsies, and I've also been a researcher with the Smithsonian, which means that I am absolutely qualified to talk to you all about elephants. So I'm going to shift that entirely. And before we talk about the dead ones, we got to talk about the live ones. One, because in their own right, they are incredible creatures, but also because they are something known as ecosystem engineers. This is your first vocab word for today. You will be quizzed. An ecosystem engineer is an organism that simply by existing in its behaviors in the environment, it has an outsized impact and actually reshapes its own world. So in life, we know that elephants, African elephants in particular, can impact erosion, they can impact seed dispersal, they can change whole ecosystems from woodlands to savannas, and there's a slew of papers that have found how significant they are in life. But I'm not interested, well, I am interested, but anyway, the research doesn't focus on them in life. It focuses on their impacts, and this is a corpse warning. I warned you in the beginning, there's gonna be dead bodies. I wanna know what happens after they die, because an organism that large being deposited on the environment surely has some type of ecological impact. The amount of nutrients in its body, I'm going to start clicking through this. You'll see this is a relatively fresh carcass. And as I go a bit back in time through other carcasses, notice the vegetation that surrounds it. Notice that some of this might be changing. Clearly there is a difference, and clearly this persists. But simply by seeing and observing isn't enough to convince the scientific audience that there is something going on. So our biggest question, the most general question and our first question is just, are these actually ecologically distinct? Are these carcasses different from the surrounding matrix? And so to be able to investigate that, it meant a lot of soil sampling. It meant a lot of measuring bones and mapping bone fields, finding new and fun ways to injure myself, carrying soil samples for kilometers and trucking them back in and out of the field to raise in different greenhouse experiments. It meant a lot of sampling of the herbaceous communities, of identifying species, of setting up camera traps. And before you think that this is a one-man show, I do want to make sure that I give a shout out to my team, because there's a lot of people involved in the Megacarcass Ecology Project. There's a lot of people that are also doing some of this measuring, the analyses. And again, we worked with Sand Parks through this. And if you are interested at all, I'd really like if you could check out our website to see all of the different researchers and again, everyone else, because I'm one part of it. But our first 4 findings, so there are 4 things that I can report now that we absolutely know. And the first one, and that's in the top left, is that by measuring the nitrogen and phosphorus content of the soil at the center of the carcass versus farther away, we found that there are indeed increased nutrient content at the site. I mean, this goes without saying, of course, the amount of matter that's deposited there, but we still need to actually do the samples to prove it. We've also found down the bottom that the carcasses from that soil increases respiration. We found that microbial content is higher. This means that the microbes are consuming that nutrients. And we've also found at the top right that the above ground biomass changes. We've measured nitrogen and phosphorus contents of leaves of plants within 0, 5, 10, 15, etc. from the carcass and have found that those that are closest have the highest nutrient content, which makes sense, but that's significant because that means that the nutrients that have been deposited from this carcass are moving from the carcass into the below ground nutrient resource and then moving up into the plants. And this plant community also differs. So there are, carcassphere is a great word that is made up that I will turn into a real word, I hope. But the carcassphere does differ. So there's different plant communities that exist there. So our most general question, again, is, are these ecologically distinct? And the answer is that yes. There are ecologically significant differences between the carcasspheres, the megacarcass sites. I've been calling them impact zones. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but they're different. But answering this one question actually leads to a slew of additional questions because these sites are different. They're distinct. They don't all look exactly the same. And so the first question that I really wanted to investigate is really what's driving this bone dispersal? Why do the bones in some sites look so different than others? And this is important too because remember, bones have a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus, and I'm an ecologist, so I'm really interested in this nutrient movement. And so you'll notice some of these sites, the bones are distributed more widely than others. Sometimes they're clumped. And we know that predators will move when they're there first. This is a nice artistic shot, right? We don't have to have the whole body. But we know that predators will move some of the body. And we know that scavengers will show up as well. And setting up the camera traps, we had thought that we would mostly be seeing scavengers coming to these sites. But interestingly enough, elephants visit them, and we knew that elephants would visit these sites, and when elephants are visiting, they're depositing dung, which means more nitrogen, which means more phosphorus, but they're not just visiting and coming and touching the carcasses. There's other studies that have confirmed that elephants will come back, but what we've found is they're not just coming back to these sites, they're also kind of interacting with them, because elephants are very social creatures. They have bonds that last for decades, and they can remember locations. And when they come to these sites, they're not just bringing nutrients with them, but they'll pick up bones, and they don't just pick them up, they'll also roll skulls away. So they're moving this. And for me as an ecologist, this is significant because they're then changing the ecology of the system. We had thought that they were a net increase in nitrogen and phosphorus. They're coming to these areas, they're bringing in these nutrients, but they're also interacting in such a way that they're removing some of it. They're taking pieces of these carcasses with them, and in taking them with them and in changing that ecology, their ecosystem impacts are actually different than what we had initially envisioned. And so the reason that this is significant, I've put up Kruger once more, but we've found that these are ecologically distinct, that elephants interact with them. Remember, this is a cognizant creature doing this, but I want you to imagine, before I click next, how many points are there really? Like, I'm gonna show you a map of every carcass site that we know of from 2017 until 2023. So I want you to pick, like look at the map, and like imagine in your head, like how many dots are gonna show up, right? It's a lot. There's 13,000 elephants alive right now, at least in Kruger National Park. 1 to 3% of them die each year. That's 100 to 300 additional carcasses a year. Each one of these, ecologically distinct, different from the surrounding environment, behaviorally important to elephants. So this is significant. It's not just a few carcasses dispersed, there's a lot of them. And not only that, but you can perfectly see Kruger And you'll notice to the left, there's none of them. That's because there's no elephants outside of this area. And so this is another vocab term, is that this is an example of an extinction aftershock. Because in these areas where the elephants no longer exist, remember, we've found these are significant, they're behaviorally different, it's not happening there anymore. They've lost this ecosystem function that we didn't even know existed, which we found is ecologically significant. And on that note, because I find this obviously to be fascinating, is I've partnered with Utah Public Radio to do a dispatch series, which will be online for free. Again, I'm going for my PhD in Utah State. We're also developing a documentary. The trailer is already online. You could check it out. And I'm also working with Data Nuggets and a couple other nonprofits to develop freely available educational materials. Again, teacher, I can't help it. I love being able to share my excitement with others and also be able to teach about nutrient cycling, because normally we teach these big maps and things. It's really hard to understand, but if you use these carcasses as a fulcrum, you have what I think would be a really interesting and engaging way to teach it. And on that note, we've also partnered with a local post-apartheid university. I've been able to pay my field techs, and we're working with the undergraduate programs to give these students experience in science. They'll be on the publications as well, which is really significant for me. And none of this would have been possible without my funders. And I thank you very, very much. And I'll take any questions. Yes, thank you. Someone else loud.
Will there be any reintroduction into the other areas? So, like the wolves back at Yellowstone, so where we can actually see the differences that are made in other countries and other parks?
So there's so many things to say about that. So one big thing is that it depends on also the carnivore density in the area. In some areas in Botswana, where there's very few carnivores, the ecological impacts are completely different. In terms of right outside Kruger, there's really no way that they could be introduced outside because they'll be killed pretty immediately. So there are private parks along there, but just widely introducing them back into the wild, there are currently no, at least in South Africa, there's currently nothing in place that I know of.
Is there still a lot of prejudice against elephants as far as like growing food and wildlife and other villages?
Can be. There's also a lot of eating of them, and so it's a tricky situation that I can't say too much about because sand parks would. Anyway, next question.
Can we also think of this as evidence for elephants mourning, being sad?
Yes. So I purposely didn't use that word, but I'm glad you used that word. The reason I didn't use it is because I don't know. Like when we say mourning for humans, it's like a general kind of term, and mourning could potentially be a jargony term for elephants because what does it like mean in mourning? Like they come to these sites, they visit the sites, but they don't always do the same thing. Sometimes they'll come, they sniff around the area, they leave. Sometimes they take pieces of them. I know the gender of the elephants who have died now. I have all of the information because Kruger, whenever an elephant dies that they know of, they harvest the ivory so that poachers don't, and it's stored in the park. But I have all the information on these elephants. It could be that they have like different ceremonies, maybe. I'm kind of hesitant to say that, depending on how well they know the individual. But I would definitely say that this fits under mourning. I'm sorry I'm being cagey about it, man, but it's an interesting issue.
Thank you so much for presenting. That was awesome and really cool footage that you got. I did have a question. So you had mentioned that the nutrients in the soil were different from where the carcasses kind of dissolved into the soil, but then you also said that the elephants visit the site and then like the dung and stuff also went into the soil. How did you calculate a difference between the nutrients coming from the carcasses or the nutrients coming from the dung?
So that is a really good question. And we did do radio isotopic analyses to be able to look at the types of nutrients that are actually coming from them, and we know that the majority of them are coming from the bodies, but not all of them. So there is a lot of nitrogen that's coming just from the elephants revisiting. And I almost think that it would be best, instead of just calling it like just the impacts of the carcass, all of the behaviors, because you kind of have to take them under that, because I can't cage off a huge, well, I don't have the, I couldn't cage off the whole thing. The fact that the elephants come and visit is also part of the ecology of that. So we're studying that in conjunction with the carcass.
We gotta unfortunately keep going, but thank you so much, Ryan. I love getting a chance to have an educator in the room. You can totally tell he's got amazing teacher moves. And just how amazing to hear about elephant culture and revisiting these almost seeming like burial sites. I went a bit further because Ryan could not. But I want to introduce our next Fjallraven grantee, Aoife Cantwell-Jones. And Aoife's coming from Imperial College of London and doing research very appropriately in Sweden, which is the country where Fjallraven, the company, was founded, and all of their amazing apparel that they have. And she's working on pollinators and some amazing, amazing stuff on bees. So I'll let Aoife take it away.
Thanks. So hi, I'm Aoife. I'm a PhD student from Imperial College. And last year, I went on an expedition to Arctic Sweden to see how the bumblebees there are being impacted by climate change. So the Arctic is warming really rapidly, much faster than the global mean, and we're already seeing large changes to the flora and fauna that exist there. So most notably, many species are trying to track the cold conditions under which they evolved. So this means either moving northwards or moving upwards up mountains to higher elevations. And this means that some species are actually doing relatively okay under climate change. They might be expanding their ranges, but many species are also doing really badly. So their ranges are contracting, and they're now having to compete with new species that are invading into their territories. And I think it's generally expected that it's the species that are most adapted to these cold conditions, so the Arctic specialists and the alpine specialists, that are most likely to be impacted by climate change. And so with such large fluxes happening in Arctic communities, one question that's really outstanding is how will the web of interactions between species be impacted? And by web of interactions, what I mean is the sort of interdependencies that exist between species. That mean if one species is impacted by climate change, there can be ripple effects through the community that mean that other species are impacted. So as a little example of this, in Scandinavia, bumblebees are really important pollinators. And one plant species that they pollinate is the cloudberry, or Rubus camemoris, which produces really cute little orangey yellow berries that are then eaten by reindeer. And these reindeer are herded by the indigenous Sami people there, who sell it as part of their livelihood. So if anthropogenic activities impact the bumblebees, there can be sort of ripple effects that ultimately could impact the livelihood of the indigenous Sami. So we were really interested in looking at this sort of web of interactions and seeing how it's being impacted. And we decided to focus on the interactions between plants and bumblebees, given how important they are for pollination. So our study site for this is Mount Nolia, which is set in Abisko National Park. And you can see from these two photos that there's already been some change. So these photos were taken around 90 years apart, and the tree line has already risen by about 60 meters, and the alpine zone has contracted by about a third. So we're already seeing a sort of squeezing of the alpine community. And we chose this site due to its historic relevance. So it was first visited back in 1917 by a really visionary researcher called Thor Friis. He set up a transect along the mountain to study the timing of plant seasonal events. It was later revisited in the 1970s by two researchers called Esther Ranta and Hans Lundberg. And they instead looked at bumblebees and how they interact with plants. So these historic studies are super neat because they provide us with a baseline that we can compare that existed sort of before modern warming happened. So we can see what the community looked like before modern warming and how it's changed. And we focused on the work by Hans Lundberg and were able to extract information about a really detailed sort of breakdown of the bumblebee population. So this table shows how many of each species they actually saw on the mountain. So we, in our work, compared what the community looked like in the 1970s to today to see which species are winners, which species are losers, and in particular, is it the alpine species that have been most negatively affected? So to answer this question, we retraced the steps of those pioneering researchers and ventured to the Arctic last summer. When we arrived there in mid-May, it was just completely covered in snow. It was so magical. But I would understand if you looked at that and thought I was totally mad for going to the Arctic to study bumblebees. But what's so crazy is that despite how much snow, there's actually still life there. So these are willow catkins that poke out through the snow, even in May, and are then visited by lovely bumblebees like this Bombus lapponicus. But the other thing that's so cool about the Arctic is that things change there really fast. It's got a really compressed growing season. So in the course of just a few weeks, the snow melts and the ice on the lake next to the mountain thaws, and the whole system really undergoes a metamorphosis into this dynamic, flower-rich and beautiful community. So we got to experience this dynamism by sampling over the entire growing season, so from about mid-May to mid-August. And we conducted regular surveys of the bumblebee community in 13 plots located along Tor Fries's transect. And so this just involved us hiking up the mountain, visiting our plots, and basically sprinting after every bumblebee that we saw. With all the bumblebees that we caught, we would then ID them, note down any plant species that they interacted with, and also take photos for sort of future data analysis. So using this sort of species breakdown that we collected, we were able to compare the community in the past to the present to see how warming might have impacted them. So you can see that on this bar graph here. So on the left shows the community from the 1970s, and on the right shows the community last year. And the two different colours refer to whether the species was an alpine species or subalpine species. So we can already see that the alpine species make up less of the community today than they did in the past. So they are being sort of squeezed by the subalpine community. And when we break this down into the different species that are present, we can see that some large shifts have already occurred. So here the different colours just represent the different species. So in particular, I want to draw your attention to the species in yellow. So this species was actually relatively common back in the 1970s, but today it's almost non-existent. This species is Bombus hyperboreus. It's an alpine specialist, and it's already been listed as vulnerable by the IUCN. So the trend that we're seeing here is really worrying. It was so cool to be able to kind of compare what we saw to work that was done in the 1970s and really build on the shoulders of past researchers. But it is important to remember that it can be a little bit, you should be careful when you're only comparing 2 years of data, because you can get large fluctuations in populations between years. So it'd be really awesome if we could go out to our field site again to really see if these are long-term trends that we're seeing. And another thing that we're going to continue to look at, and actually is the last chapter in my PhD, is to really look at the impact of climate on specific plant-bumblebee interactions to see what role temperature might be playing in sort of mediating them. So stay tuned for that coming next. I would like to say such a massive thank you to Fjellraven and the Explorers Club for making this research possible. And I would also like to thank the field team that was out with me, especially my supervisor, Dr. Richard Gill, George, who took many of these amazing photos, and Manon, who was the girl with the last arrow. He did this study of bumblebee population trends. And there would be a final photo of a bumblebee because they were very patient in letting us chase after them. But thank you.
The next program that I'm going to introduce is the Stevenson Exploration Advancement Program, C for short. You can see what they did there. And it is supporting marine conservation projects. Phil Stevenson has supported marine exploration to the likes of Bob Ballard, Sylvia Earle, Enrique Sala, who are legends in exploration, but he wanted to support the next generation. So we're really lucky to have them supporting the next generation of explorers who are going to make the new discoveries. We have Deborah Santos de Acevedo Mena, who is doing incredible research in Florida, understanding shark ecotourism. Raise your hand if you've dived with sharks before. Wow. And I thought that would be a good one to try out. Now, most of the time you're thinking, oh my God, how can we protect ourselves from the sharks when you dive with them? But the amazing work that Deb is doing is how we can think about protecting the sharks from us, even when we're diving with them. So.
Thank you. I'm good. I think I'm tall enough. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I didn't realize I was in a room full of shark divers. This is amazing. Sorry if I'm a little nervous. I'm more comfortable being in the water with sharks and talking to humans. But my name is Deborah. Actually, it's Deborah Santos de Azevedo Mena. I know it's ridiculously long. I'm Brazilian. And so my project is understanding shark ecotourism and provisioning in Florida. My project is based in Jupiter, Florida, in the United States. So I was actually born in Brazil, and I came to the United States when I was 3 years old. So being in Florida, I was always around the ocean. And when I was in high school, I actually went shark tagging in the Florida Keys with the University of Miami, and that's when I saw my first shark in the wild. And ever since then, conservation pretty much became part of who I am. As an immigrant, I faced a lot of challenges and barriers with different internships I could apply for and different places I could go in the world. And so that actually inspired me to persevere and become resourceful. So I decided, let's see what's in my community and how I can positively impact and make a difference. And so I found this organization called American Shark Conservancy, and they focus on conducting research to make positive change in our community and marine conservation issues that are happening in Florida. In 2021, I was also named a National Geographic Young Explorer, and I recently co-edited a book with another organization called Minorities in Shark Science, MISS, and this book showcases different research of female shark scientists from around the world. I also just had a little baby girl named Kaya, so I'm recently a mom. Thank you, thank you. Shark diving is a lot easier than raising a kid, I will tell you that. So my project, like I said, is based in Florida, and the Florida coastline is very unique because the continental shelf is very close to land, which means we have a lot of diverse habitats. The Gulf Stream is also right there, and that brings in large pelagic and predatory fish, and also different migratory animals. Florida actually has one of the biggest diversity of sharks in the world. So in Florida, the marine ecotourism industry is absolutely booming, from scuba diving, snorkeling, and even recreational fishing. Everyone prefers the same area for the reasons that the shark do. There's a big biodiversity and abundance of prey. With that, there has been conflict between two user groups, the divers and the fishermen. This is because the dive operators may provision sharks. Provisioning means that they will actually offer food directly or passively to a shark, feeding them. This is a video that you guys can see of a diver feeding a hammerhead shark. And so with the provisioning that is happening in Florida, there has been a huge conflict with the fishermen and the divers. And so the fishermen believe that there's an increase in abundance of sharks in the areas because of that, because they believe that possibly they can eventually forgo hunting. The sharks will, if their diet's being supplemented by food being offered, they won't directly go out and hunt. It can also possibly impact their movement and their migratory patterns. And also there has been documented potential effects of sharks being hit by boats in the area. However, the perceived increase in population of sharks in Florida, there's a bunch of other explanations that is why that is happening, which I won't go into detail, but if anyone wants to chat with me about that, I would love to talk about that. So while I don't have cute Arctic fox photos or dead whales or dead elephants, I do have some graphic photos and I just want to do a little content warning. And I thought this was really important to show the huge issue that's happening in Florida. So these are photographic evidences of fishermen-shark interactions and just how frustrated this user group is. Within the last few dives, we have found sharks with bullet wounds, sharks with propeller slices, and also a knife with stabbed in the back of a shark. So they are very frustrated because they believe there's so many sharks in the water, and also they're taking their catch. So the fishermen will, throw out a line, and when they pull it in, the fish is half eaten, possibly by a shark getting to that. And that's why this project is really important, because there's a lot going on and not a lot that we know about. So there's 3 important questions that we were trying to answer. What is the parameters of the effort? So how many divers are going out? How many dive operators, how many boats are actually doing trips? We also want to know how much food is actually being eaten by the sharks and what kind of food is being offered, what kind of species of fish is being offered. And also, we want to know, is there any geographical overlap of where the operators are diving and where the fishermen are fishing? And so my project actually just got kicked off 2 months ago, so I don't have any data to present. It's very preliminary. But I did want to kind of go over a day in the life and what a survey actually entails. So when we have a day of a dive survey, we actually wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, which with the newborn, that's like sleeping in, so that's fine for me. We prefer to go out in the morning because the seas can get really rough in the afternoon. Rough meaning everyone's hanging onto the boat and people are throwing up. So we prefer to go out in the morning. And so we joined shark-focused ecotourism boats. So we join dive boats that are there for shark diving, and we go out 2 times a month for a year so we can capture any trends in their seasonality. So, different types of data that we like to collect. One is environmental data. So we want to know what's the salinity, the water temperature, or dissolved oxygen. We also want to know what the circumstances of the dive is, how many divers are in the water. And then also the fun part, shark data. We want to know what species are in the water and how many sharks are there. I actually brought in a really cool prop to show you guys. So the type of data we collect is non-invasive. We're not throwing a shark on the side of the boat and tagging it. We're actually trying to have it be more of an observational data that we collect. So there's this really cool tool that we have, and this is actually 3D printed, and it's paired lasers that are measured, and it's continuously recording video footage. And we grab that footage, we throw it into a program, and it measures the length of a shark. There's also this really cool new AI tool that we're trying to use to help positively ID shark species and actually calculate the energy that the sharks are spending while swimming around the divers. So next steps. What I really hope this project does is it could have a huge impact on the industry. Once we find out exactly what's going on, we hope that this data is going to guide best practices with regulators and state authorities. And it also gives us the opportunity to go out with the operators and chat with them, see what they're like, see what their priorities are. And if the operators are trusting us to collect the data, then they will trust the results of that data. So these activities are happening. Feeding the sharks, provisioning, it is happening in Florida. So we can either turn a blind eye or we can use that data to mitigate the effects of these activities. So I just want to thank everyone for being here and just listening to me ramble. And also want to say thank you so much to my amazing girl squad that I could not have done any of this or continue to do any of this without them. And thank you to Hannah Med, my co-PI who's in the room. And thank you also so much to the Explorers Club for making this project an opportunity. Because for me, exploration gives me the sense that anything is possible. It leads to knowledge and understanding, and that means that we can make the world a better place. So thank you for joining me in making this world a better place. I can hear you. You're good.
It's okay, I'm loud. Fellow Floridian.
Hello.
Have you found any societal correlations between shark abuse, like shooting a shark or stabbing a shark, and communities that permit shark fishing, essentially, like shark hunting and the shark marathon, game hunting that they have in Florida?
So you're asking if the groups do pretty much the same thing, they do the shark abuse. And so what we've noticed, and we're still trying to collect data, is that it also depends on the age of the fishermen. So what we've also realized is the older they are, they've been doing it for a long time, they really respect the environment and they respect the sharks, and they're like, we've been doing this for a long time, we love to do this, and with fishing in general and stuff like that. And it just seems that possibly the younger generation has a little bit of a different perspective, but there is a Facebook group that has photos and stuff of things that they're doing with sharks. It's just, we're still trying to figure that out because American Shark Conservancy has worked with different anglers on some hammerhead research, and they were absolutely amazing. And so they kind of pretty much threw out any understanding that we have of fishermen and thinking, they have the oh, macho, but no, we have fishermen that really love the environment, they really support conservation, and they want to help us as much as they can.
Another round of applause for Deborah.
Stealing this.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to mention is just like how diverse our programs are. We have researchers doing work on every single continent and coming from over 30 countries. And I love that highlight that Deborah pointed out at the end about her all-female team. We're, you know, a lot of people see the legacy of the Explorers Club and all of that, and when women were brought into the club, but how much of an amazing impact they've made over the years through grants and through exploration, and really proving that women were always explorers, and now we're just shining a bigger light on it. And in the same tune of that, the next program that I want to introduce is the Exodus Exploration Without Boundaries grant. So this is a partnership program with Exodus Travels that we designed specifically to be outside of the traditional tracks of academic research and a very open understanding or interpretation of what exploration is. Because if you're here in the morning for the EC50 presentations, exploration is being redefined in so many different ways, and we want to directly fund that as a club. So I'm really excited to bring up Amanda. Amanda Ho is our 2023 grantee with Exodus doing seagrass preservation in Cambodia. So.
Hi, so my name is Amanda Ho, and I was lucky enough to receive the Exodus Exploration Without Borders grant from the Explorers Club and Exodus Travels. So my project is seagrass conservation. Well, it's buzzing at me. Seagrass conservation in Cambodia. I'll introduce you to the research base. Welcome to Coyote. It is a tiny island within the Gulf of Thailand, about an hour from the mainland. It takes 45 minutes to walk the perimeter, and it's home only to the research base of 15 or so people and a small police outpost. So very small island to be with the same few people for 6 months. And Coyote, fun fact, directly translates to horse shit island in Khmer. This shows the surrounding protected area in blue with Coyote just at the bottom, and within the protected area, commercial bottom trawling is illegal to protect the livelihoods of local small-scale fishermen who need to be able to feed their families. So I'm going to show you a brief video because I think it better encompasses the feel for the project and will get you to understand life on the island a bit better. Everyone should love seagrass because it has this incredible ability to store carbon. The Smithsonian estimated it can capture 5 times more carbon than rainforests. Seagrass covers less than 0.1% of the ocean, yet accounts for more than 10% of the ocean's carbon storage, and is the home and feeding grounds of hundreds of creatures. Cambodia has a stunning amount of biodiversity. We found 6 species of seagrass on 1 free dive alone. Our data will not only help inform the designation of marine fisheries management areas, but also inform the placement of anti-trawling structures that will prevent boats from trawling seagrass beds within their perimeter. Thank you to the Explorers Club and Exodus Travels for supporting seagrass conservation. Okay, I hope you guys maybe could get a sense of what it would have been like to be there yourselves. Let me go to the next slide. So unfortunately, seagrass conservation is facing many, many challenges, including rising sea temperatures, overfishing, bottom trawling, ocean acidification, nutrient pollution, as you can see in this photo here, and a huge algal bloom was happening on the coast of Coaxay because of its close proximity to the Mekong River, which is one of the most polluted in the world, and a lack of data, especially in Southeast Asia, and a lack of public interest. But not from you guys, right? Awesome. Okay. With this project, my team at Marine Conservation Cambodia and I aim to prevent future losses by mapping and monitoring seagrass meadows, as well as coral reefs and bivalve beds around the region to inform the placement of new protected areas, and also to inform the placement of anti-trawling structures, like that big concrete block you saw in the video that rip up trawling nets as they pass over it. It's a very DIY conservation thing, and they're very, very heavy. In total, we surveyed over 1,000 points at my time there, all by free diving. So it's very, very exhausting. So seagrass conservation is actually a very action-packed world, despite what you might think. So again, trawling is illegal within protected areas in Cambodia, but enforcement is non-existent. So it was really us against the trawlers every day, and they hated our activities. They destroy fishing for all the local communities and local fishermen who, again, just want to feed their families. So it was very important to stop them, and they are mafia-run, and that is not an overstatement. They would terrorize our island and chase us whenever we're on surveys. They have rammed into our wooden pier, set bungalows on fire in on our island, and sunk our boats. So they meant business. One day, on a survey, we saw a trawler illegally trawling inside of the protected area close to our island. So we called the Marine Police, who, for the first time in history, actually came and arrested them and towed them back to the mainland. And we thought it was a win until we found ourselves being summoned and deposed by the Cambodian Ministry of Fisheries, because, as luck would have it, they were being paid by the trawlers. It's a very fun system they have at the fisheries departments over there. So it's a very, very fun day, sitting in a very, very hot building, being interrogated. Anyway, that was just the government. We couldn't have done this without the support from the local communities and community members and local fishermen. We tried to give back as much as we could by hosting several beach cleanups along the Cambodian coastline, you can see there, inviting students to live and learn from us on the island, giving swimming lessons to university kids, providing paid work for community members to help build the blocks that go into the anti-trawling structures, and hosting an educational booth at the local sea festival where we played Pin the Tail on the Dugong, patent pending. It was going so well. Okay, so we did observe reduced trawling by our anti-trawling blocks, and that effect spread to surrounding areas because trawlers didn't want to accidentally go near one, so they stayed very far away. And we also noticed that the bulk of the seagrass we found, which is shown in green, was in 4 meters or shallower waters, because that is the depth at which trawlers can no longer be in. So despite all the other impacts, like ocean acidification, nutrient pollution, warming, there is still a ton of seagrass. It's really just the trawlers in this area. So now we know that is the one thing that we should really focus on preventing for the future. And you can also see corals in red and bivalves in yellow. We are working on publishing this data, hopefully soon, and the block deployment is ongoing. In 5 years' time, the Cambodian coastline will be covered with them, and the seagrass beds will be nice and protected. So thank you once again to Exodus Travels and the Explorers Club, along with my team at Marine Conservation Cambodia and all the local communities we worked with. Yeah, what's up?
Thank you. That was a beautiful presentation and amazing work. So I'm just wondering, could you tell us a little bit more about the blocks, the trawler blocks, and how that idea came about and why they're so effective?
Yeah, so they're effective because they're cheap and easy to do, which is really important when you're doing work in developing countries. They consist of about, it depends on the size, but the biggest one is 27 cement blocks that are 100 kilos each. For reference for Americans, that is 2 of me, more than 2 of me. And I had to carry some of them, yes. Basically, they sit on the seafloor, wrapped up together in that kind of pentagon shape. And as a trawler net goes over it, it's sturdy, it's not moving, so the net just rips up. And then they are out a ton of money, and they decide, okay, let's not trawl there anymore.
Hello. Hi.
Hey.
I just wondering if this is also something that could be applied to other islands and any process of it that you'd be able to protect, especially in Cambodia and neighboring areas.
Yeah, so they recently got, so Marine Conservation Cambodia, who I'm working with, I recently got a huge grant, like $2 million from the Asian Development Bank, to get this big barge and drop blocks along the coastline. And what's really cool is we're using the communities near the coast to build them with cement, just in a little mixer, very, very easy to do. And we pay them, and then they bring it out. We use like floating pontoons that we drag, and they bring it out, and once we get to that point, we can put them together and drop it, because erecting them underwater is a bit of a struggle, because it's very, very turbid. You can't see anything. You're just feeling your way with ropes, especially when you're dropping big, heavy things and kicking up all the sediment. Yeah, so there would be a lot.
Thanks so much, Amanda. So I think it was John Glenn who said exploration is curiosity in action, and I feel like there's so much action. Our grantees are fearless, and Amanda, you really showed that in your work, how persistent you are. So just, yeah, thank you for standing up for the seagrass beds. I do want to take one moment to really acknowledge someone who does a tremendous amount of work. You might be wondering, how are we able to review over 1,500 applications? And that is all by the hard work of Emerald Nash, our Director of Grants. And so, yeah, I really can't overstate how much Emerald does. She's coordinated all these different programs, answering hundreds of questions per week. And yeah, she is the heart and soul of all of this. So yeah, thanks again, Emerald. I want to also make another introduction of someone who does a tremendous amount of hard work, a friend, a mentor. Rebecca Martin has founded the most incredible programs in exploration beyond even our club. She was at National Geographic for over 20 years with the Expeditions Council as well as the Young Explorers program. I was trying to think of a concise way to sum up, you know, what she has done for the field of exploration. And I think of it as she's like the mother of dreams. Like, she makes people's dreams and aspirations come true. Almost any, you know, famous explorer you could think of, she knows them and is giving them money. So without further ado, Rebecca Martin, who's going to introduce our next round of grantees.
Thanks so much, Trevor. And I have to say that I've been a member of the club for 22 years, and it's such a wonderful place and a wonderful family, all engaged in exploration. But it's an absolute joy to work with Trevor and Emerald and the whole team here at the Explorers Club. Very special group, small group. They get an incredible amount of work done among, you know, a handful of people working in grants. So as we all know, the Explorers Club has a rich history of convening explorers, of celebrating achievements in science and exploration, and of grant making. And you've heard from incredible grantees this afternoon. We had several years ago, for the first time in the club's history, the largest till of funding for exploration, which was awarded through the Explorers Club Expedition grants, thanks to the generous support of Discovery. And we awarded $1.6 million dollars to 41 different projects, many of them focused on conservation, but the whole gamut of exploration was supported by this program. And now that that contractual obligation has come to a close, I'm delighted to announce, actually, that we're transitioning the program to the Explorers Club Impact Grants. And I'm very grateful to Richard Garrett and Will Roseman for agreeing to engage in this transition. We're receiving support from basically an advisory council of Explorers Club members. So please feel free to talk to me afterward if you're interested. And I also have to thank Darlene Anderson. Darlene, are you in the room? I don't know if Darlene's in the room, but she was the first one on board with this new program. So you will hear from one of our impact grantees today. But it's, why is it impact? Because we're able to provide more support to these grantees because it's so challenging to find funding. It's hard enough to develop your projects and to carry them out in the field. But in terms of resources to fund exploration, there aren't that many places to go. So the larger grant actually takes some of the pressure off of these scientists and explorers and helps have a greater impact ultimately on the planet. So we're super excited, and you can learn more about the impact grants. Also, Emerald says that the impact grant program's going up on the website this Tuesday, right, Emerald? So, okay, with that, we're going to hear now from two of our Explorers Club Expedition grantees. The first one is Elodie Freeman, and her bio says that she is a doctoral student, but actually I have some exciting news. Elodie just received her PhD from Oxford University. And she's studying evolutionary anthropology in the primate models for behavioral evolution lab at Oxford. Her research has focused on chimpanzee self-medication, specifically how chimps transmit medicinal knowledge across generations. We gave her the grant in 2022, and we referred to the project as Chimp Docs. So please welcome Elodie Freeman.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Rebecca, for that wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to be here today. I'm actually from New York, so it's a nice homecoming for me. So I'm going to refer to my notes a little bit because I can talk for days, and if I don't do that, then I will talk for too long. But my name is Elodie Freeman, and my research is on how wild chimpanzees self-medicate with medicinal plants. And I'm going to be talking today about some of the work I did as part of my PhD project at the University of Oxford. So my academic background is a bit unusual in that over the years I've worked across several seemingly unrelated fields, mainly botany, primatology, and social anthropology. And this interdisciplinarity was not necessarily strategic or intentional. I just genuinely couldn't decide which topic I found more fascinating, primates, plants, or people. So when I learned that wild chimpanzee is my favorite species since I was a kid, intentionally self-medicate with medicinal plants, and may even have their own medicinal cultures, I realized I'd stumbled upon a way to combine all of my interests. I was even more excited when I learned there was an entire field devoted to the topic of animal self-medication with a name that most people have never heard of before and cannot pronounce, the field of zoopharmacognosy. At that point, I was working in documentary filmmaking in New York as an associate producer and creative director, learning the craft of visual storytelling. I loved my work, but I couldn't stop thinking about self-medicating chimpanzees. So in 2019, I took a risk, I quit my job, and I moved to Oxford to delve deeper into the topic. What started as a master's turned into a more ambitious project, and here I am almost 5 years later with a PhD on the subject. But what exactly is animal self-medication? For the dog and cat owners amongst you, this behavior may look familiar. A pet eating grass when they have a bad stomach to induce vomiting is a common example. But what you may not know is that there are actually examples of self-medication across the animal kingdom, from bustard birds and civets to porcupines and dolphins. Today, I'm going to be talking about self-medication in a single species, the chimpanzee, who along with the bonobo are our closest common relatives. When I got started in the field, there were only 2 scientifically proven chimpanzee self-medicative behaviors, both of which had been shown to help rid chimpanzees of internal parasites. The first behavior, leaf swallowing, involves the selection of leaves with tiny Velcro-like hooks called trichomes, which are then swallowed whole. As the leaf passes through the body of the chimpanzee, the tiny hairs catch the parasites in the gut and flush them out. The second known behavior is called bitter pith chewing. And for this, chimps strip off the stem of a plant called Vernonia amygdalina and chew the juicy pith, which is full of antiparasitic compounds. These compounds, when ingested, actually chemically exterminate the internal parasites. So this is an example of chemical self-medication versus mechanical self-medication, which is leaf swallowing. And while over the years several other behaviors have been floated as putatively medicinal, very surprisingly, few people have actually systematically studied these behaviors in the wild, leaving huge gaps in the field, which is every PhD student's dream. So when I began my PhD in 2020, I realized that I had a lot of work to do. And so once I secured a field site, I came up with the following 3 broad categories, objectives of my research. So first, I needed to do some groundwork. To advance the field, I knew I'd need to identify some novel self-medicative behaviors and medicinal plants. Second, I wanted to see if there was any overlap between medicinal plants used by the chimpanzees and those used by local healers in communities near the forest where I'd be working. And third, I wanted to document the journey so I could later share my findings with the rest of the world. I arrived at the Badongo Conservation Station in June 2021, located within the Badongo Forest in western Uganda, for the first of 2 4.5-month field seasons. My project called for interdisciplinary methods. Most importantly, I had to collect behavioral data. So this mainly meant running around the forest, frantically following after the groups of chimpanzees, learning their names and how to tell them each apart individually, and recording everything they did. I also had to collect and identify all of the plants in their diet and conduct ethnomedicinal interviews to determine whether any of these plants were used for medicine by local healers. To know whether a chimpanzee was sick when I observed them eating something unusual, I had to consistently health monitor the community, looking for signs of parasites or indicators of infections. And importantly, I also had to determine whether any of the suspected medicinal plants had any pharmacological properties. So to do this, I worked with my colleague and Explorers Club member, Dr. Fabian Schultz, to test their bioactivity. And finally, to determine the availability of any suspect medicinal plants, I needed to conduct forest transects. And I started to find some really cool things right away. So during that first field season, I observed a couple of strange events involving chimpanzees eating bark. Bark is known to be of poor nutritional value and to be relatively difficult and time-consuming to exploit. But for some reason, I noticed the Badongo chimpanzees were targeting certain barks when there were plenty of ripe, very nutritionally rich fruits available. So I honed my project once again and began focusing on chimpanzee bark feeding behaviors. When I came home from the field, I felt I may be onto something, and I knew I was going to be going back to Badongo in a couple of months, and I wanted to be able to document my next field season. So I applied to the Explorers Club expedition grant. And when I got it, I called up my old college roommate, Austin Deary, a fantastic cinematographer based here in New York City, and I asked him if he wanted to come to the field with me. And he, being up for anything, agreed to come join me in Uganda for the last 3 weeks of my field season and help me shoot a short documentary. So what did I discover? I can't possibly summarize it in a slide. It would take a year, but I'll try to summarize some key findings. First, I anecdotally observed chimpanzees seeking out certain tree species for bark when they were sick or wounded, and that chimps targeted these certain barks at intentional seeming dosages. I also discovered that the frequency and seasonality of bark feeding varied greatly depending on the tree species, suggesting that different barks have different functions in the chimpanzee diet. And this may seem obvious, but it's actually an important and novel finding, and counter to much of the literature at the moment. So our pharmacology assays also revealed some very cool results. Fabian and I found that several of the barks in the Bodongo chimpanzee diets were highly bioactive, exhibiting strong antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties. And a few of these barks even had stronger effects than some of the drugs currently available on the market. And lastly, many of the barks used by the chimpanzees were also commonly used medicines in the nearby villages, known to be effective for curing a range of ailments. And very importantly, I also learned that many of these barks are used as the first line of defense against common illnesses like malaria for those who can't afford to travel to hospitals. But to me, the most exciting find was the discovery of a tree that ticked all of the boxes of being a novel self-medicative behavior, and is also considered to be a powerful medicine by people in the local villages, a tree called Alstonia bunai. The first clue was that Alstonia bunai is very rare, and many of the documented cases involved sick or injured chimpanzees, often traveling very far distances to take very tiny bites of this very bitter bark. So none of these aspects would be normal for a normal feeding behavior in chimpanzees. I also found evidence that Bodongo chimpanzees target Alstonia more during months when respiratory infections are known to increase. When we tested the bioactivity of this bark, it had the strongest antibacterial properties of any of our samples. So Alstonia soon became the subject of my film, and though we're still in the very, very early stages of editing and fundraising, I've cut together a short sneak peek for the talk today. I'm not an editor, so bear with me, to hopefully illustrate some of the points that I've discussed. I just have one more point. That seemed like the end. It's not. It almost does. As you just saw, there's way more to the story of Estonia than just the science. During my time in the forest, I stumbled on many illegal logging camps, as you've seen, and where Estonia trees are being cut and sold to make coffins, of all things. There's also a new looming threat, forest clearing for oil roads. Badongo Forest has a large target on its back. So, quickly, why should we care about this, and why has this become sort of my mission in life? For one, these trees could be critical for keeping wild populations of chimpanzees alive and healthy. Cutting down chimpanzee forest pharmacies will likely leave them susceptible to previously treatable pathogens. Secondly, these forests are also the first line of defense for many local people. Protecting the forest protects access to healthcare for many forest edge communities and safeguards generations of traditional medicinal knowledge. And finally, from a pharmacological perspective, the discovery of new bioactive plant compounds will likely be critical in the near future for creating drugs that can tackle growing antibacterial resistances and new diseases. So luckily for us, the natural world is full of compounds and that can help cure us, and even luckier, many of these cures have already been discovered by both non-human and human communities who call the forest home. The challenge now will be to protect these forests as well as the communities, ensuring that this knowledge does not disappear. So thank you so much to all of my colleagues, my collaborators, my international network of friends, and of course to the Explorers Club for allowing me to document my work, allowing me to share my work and help fight for these forest pharmacies. I couldn't have done this work without them. And please get in touch if you want to chat chimp or have any other questions.
Since Alstona boni is an endangered species in certain Central African countries, were you able to identify like other plants that might have the same medicinal properties, just in case, I don't know, deforestation and other issues happen in Uganda at your field site?
It's such a good question. I think pharmacologically, we still have so much to learn. And again, we were testing, Dr. Fabian Schultz and I were testing. We took at first 17 plant samples. We're going to do another 20 coming up soon. And we tested them against a panel of different bacteria. And those are just specific strains of those bacteria. So every, you could test, we took kind of the most dangerous strains, the strains that are kind of known to be the most fatal. And there's all sorts of technical minutia kind of about, every plant has different properties, and they might kill the same disease, but in different ways because of different compounds. So we're kind of still in the early stages of figuring out why certain plants are effective in the way that they are. But there's so much space to learn and so much research left to do.
How amazing that, we think of these wild places as vectors of disease, but blow our minds, there might be like the cure to diseases out there. How amazing.
Thank you, Howdy. So our second Explorers Club expedition grantee, who received her grant in 2022, is Dr. Andrea Prosotto, and she studied the absolutely adorable crab-cracking Capuchin monkeys in Brazil. So please welcome Andrea.
I don't know. Let's see. Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about the Capuchins today. I just identify with you because I also left my job to follow monkeys and in the wild, and this seems that something's primatologists, right? The grant was 2022, it's still 2024 because one of our drones failed last year, so we go back in May to shoot it again, the thermal cameras. Okay, so I work in the northeast of Brazil with two populations of Capuchin monkeys. One, it's been there for 20 years that we have a field site that it's a long-term field site. But with the changes in the landscape, we start to see that there is a it's becoming more difficult for them to find what they need to use tools. The culture that they have in that locations, it's very, well, it's obviously very important. It's culture and traditions, and the important portion of this is that they are social learners, right? So a skilled tool use pass this culturally to the young. And for us, it's very important because, you know, it's our closest relative, and it's very similar to the human culture. These animals reach the level of being a skilled tool user because the environment offers these conditions for them to do it, right? So, particular to capuchins, we discovered that they used tools in this area in 2003, like about 20 years ago. And gave us a lot of insights into the human tool use behavior as well. So these ones are infants, they are not skilled tool users, and they spend a lot of time manipulating the rocks. So for one day they will become a very skilled, some become very skilled tool users, some just don't do it. They just, you know, but this shows us that this can become like that's how humans develop it, right? So by using tools, we develop new technologies and advancements that if we don't have the, that's funny, the correct environment, we can do it. So in this area, northeast of Brazil, the soils are very sandy. If they don't find the rocks, they cannot make hammers and anvils to crack the hard nuts there. But very recently, we discovered that the same species in the mangroves, which has no connection with the forest of the Cerrado, use tools as well to crack open the crabs. They can open the crabs, the exoskeleton of the crab, the soft tissue with hands, but when it comes to eat the claws, that's when they use tools to open. Apparently, they are just like us. They like that dense meat of the crabby claws. Yeah, and but these capuchins are even more special. We have primates that use tools, but not living solely within mangroves. We have primates that live within mangroves, but not solely. They commute. And we have primates that eating crabs, but also it's not that common. So these species, if not the only one so far, they live only within mangroves, which is a very harsh environment to live, even to work there. Last year, I spent 15 days, and I'm dealing with more than a year of infection that nobody discovers what it is. So obviously, it's from a mangrove. And they only eat crabs. They eat a little piece of trees, but crabs is their main diet there. And, well, and they use tools, the wood tools there. What's happening there now is in the last decade, when we start to discover these new behaviors within those more remote areas, there's also a substantial loss of habitat. So the humans are encroaching these species into very small fragments, and it's making more difficult for us to continue this type of research, and I will show you why. Let me show, well, I'm not a videographer, and my video is very like do yourself, right? Let's see if I can show a little bit more what we have been doing there. That's what, thank you. Thank you. That's what the project was about. It's identify what is going on in the mangrove islands and how sustainable they are to maintain this Capuchin population. So since the pandemics, we have been these mangroves are protected areas in Brazil. You shouldn't build anything there. But since the COVID, we have been seeing like that people are building like temporary houses. We think it's for the fishermen, but we are really not sure. There is an incredible amount of tourism in the area now, disorganized, that it's exploratory work that we have been doing to understand the impact of the tourism and other companies around that island. So we when you take out the mangroves, obviously you change the composition of the soil because the sandy soil, the soil becomes sandy, and the mud flat does not allow the growth of crabs, which is the main food source for the Capuchins. That's what we have been seeing since 2018. Another problem is obviously primates are not in a good situation for conservation. About 68% of the species are threatened by anthropogenic pressures right now, and the habitat transformation is one of the big issues for agriculture mainly. We did a global mangrove primate analysis, and agriculture is the main source of conversion. So it's always their culture. If there is no rocks, if there is no crabs, so there's no culture. The young now are learning how to steal food from people than used to eat the natural food, yeah. You know? So another problem is that this organization of the tourism in the area is overfishing the crabs. So when we see a fish like the amount of crabs that have been collected, half of this amount, when it reaches the restaurants, they are already spoiled. So it's not a sustainable way to fish the crabs. And then, well, that is disorganization of the tourism in the area is one of the biggest problems. The Capuchins are finding food too easy, so there's no need to use the tools. Another problem that we are in the beginning of understanding, because we are collecting data now, is that the infants now are very, very lethargic when they are around these touristic areas. We still don't know if it's a stress level or if it is malnourishment, because the food, they are eating cookies. And yeah, the cookies are the villain of the food there. So the mom eat cooks, give cooks to the young, which is completely different than what you're going to see in the wild. So with this, tool use is a consequence of the opportunity that the environment offers, not only did for us, but do for other species. And so if we lower the availability of food, of course we are not gonna have the young learning by social learning with the adult skilled tool users. One of the dreams now, and it's happening, in the last 5 years, people are trying to include behavior as a conservation policies for countries where the animals have unique behaviors, like for elephants or for whales. And then that's one thing that we are trying to add in Brazil as well. So I'm from Brazil, I forgot to say. But, include behavior as a conservation issue. So if there are local traditions that needs to be conserved, so those should be included for wildlife as well, or for other non-human primates. And keep the infants healthy, right? So here we see an infant that the mommy was actually playing with the camera, and she left the infant alone, but you can see that there's no lethargy. This is a wild baby, and he was just there walking around while she was she stopped obviously to play with the camera, but at the beginning she was trying to move it to see what it was. So it's a completely different activity levels for infants when they are in the wild and for infants when they are in the touristic area. So this project was largely funded by the Explorer Club and the East Carolina University, and I really thank you for your generosity and support for this research. Thank you.
Hello, fellow Brazilian. I just had a really quick question. So you had mentioned that there's some conservation plans that you guys are trying to do because of all the tourists feeding the monkeys, and so they're not able to take that tradition of like opening crabs and stuff to their babies. What are some of the conservation plans that you guys are planning to implement in the tourist area?
Yeah, so that's the plan is what we write in the paper, right? And somebody here before me said that there is no enforcement. I think it was in the Cambodia case, right? So what we are doing now is talking to the stakeholders that are the companies that promote the tourism in the local area, because they bring like you can find like in a very small area, like I will be 5 hectares. 2,000 people in at one time. I mean, it's very, very small space for these people to stay. So this is one thing. When they get there, the first thing they do is giving food for the monkeys, because they want to see the monkeys. It's a cycle. So you give food for the monkeys because you want to see the monkeys. The fishermen and the touristic companies collect all this crab to sell for the tourism. And the local community and the monkeys end up with bad food and no natural way to continue their behavior. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's a beginning of implementation, talking to people first to promote coexistence. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrea. And last but certainly not least is Dr. Jamin Greenbaum, who is an observational geophysicist at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, focusing on problems related to coastal glacier thinning and sea level rise. We've actually given Jamin 2 grants, so he received an Explorers Club Expedition grant. But I'm delighted to announce that he is the first Explorers Club Impact grantee. So congratulations, Jamin. And over time, we started to refer to Jamin as a kind of James Bond of climate change. And you'll see why. He's very low-key about it. But if you read the feature article in the New Yorker, August 2022, about Jamin's work at the Thwaites Glacier, your hair will be standing on end. I was actually quite horrified when I read the piece, even though Jamin had been calmly talking about his project, but the author who was there with him did a great job of conveying precisely how treacherous it all was. So check that out, and please give a warm welcome to Dr. Jamin Greenbaum.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you all. It's wonderful to be here. It's very special to be meeting with you in this space. I'm very grateful to the club and to Greg and Mary Moga for supporting this impact grant. I just want to take a moment and tell you what I think about this program with respect to Antarctica. And this will be a theme in the talk, that an issue we have in Antarctic science right now is that innovation is needed. There's broad community consensus on this, but there's no funding for it. And actually the options for funding it are decreasing with time, and actually the funding for Antarctic science is decreasing with time, at a time when sea level rise increases. So it's a major problem, and so programs like this are extremely important for this gap that we see in our funding profile right now in the US. I also want to introduce you to the research icebreaker Arion. It's South Korea's flagship icebreaker. My home away from home during the holidays, because it's the summertime in Antarctica, of course. And it's a wonderful ship. It sort of hits this sweet spot. It's not too big, it's not too small, it just has the capabilities you need. And I think that'll come across here. I am an assistant researcher at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. My background is in engineering before I went back to grad school in geophysics. And I spent most of my time for several years on aircraft. So I come at this problem from an airborne perspective at an oceanographic institution. And that's because I believe that aircraft offer the opportunity, and they're underutilized at the moment for exploring the places we need to explore in Antarctica. So this talk is split into 3 brief sections. Number 1 is a bit on sea level. Number 2 is about how we're using helicopters with the support of the expedition grant 2 years before, and then again this last season with the impact grant, how we're using helicopters to get what we can get from these important places in Antarctica. And then part 3 is about kind of where we need to go next. And that's what we were able to prototype this year thanks to the impact grant. So I made this map to kind of illustrate the problem. The continent itself is fairly well mapped. After 200 years of exploration, a lot of aircraft flights over the last few decades in particular, we've mapped the continent. We now know how much sea level potential is there. It's about 58 meters total, by the way. The colors represent satellite-derived ice surface elevation change. Red areas are losing mass, and there's more red areas than blue areas. So we're losing more and more mass every year. Sea level is rising as a consequence. The black lines show you where ships have historically been able to access, and the white area is the shallow part of the sea, the continental shelf. And you can see that there are frustrating gaps, white areas, next to red areas. And this is the problem. This is the big problem, and I'm calling it the blind spot. So we know sea level is rising. We know that it's going to continue rising. The problem is we don't know by how much. So the colors, I'm gonna go quickly here, but the colors represent basically our uncertainty in what society is going to do in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a large spread in sea level rise predictions just from not knowing whether we're going to curb our greenhouse gas emissions or not. But the rest of the lines, the ones above the colors, represent the science problem that remains, which is we don't know details on the physical processes driving melt. In fact, it's melting faster than our predictions currently. So it could be a lot worse than we think. In fact, it probably is going to be a lot worse. And so that little arrow represents the spread in scientific uncertainty, right? And it's about a meter in this, in this representation. It's about a meter, 3.37 feet. So like, what is a meter? That doesn't seem like that much, right? Like, but what does a meter represent? Well, in Asia alone, it represents displacement of at least 145 million people, although that's a science in itself, just understanding like where people move. In terms of 2013 US dollars, it's about a trillion. So the value of this information to collapse those lines into a more certain future is very valuable, obviously. So why aren't we able to do it yet? We've done a pretty good job innovating over the last several decades on the ocean side. Lots of autonomous instruments, satellite links, all kinds of good stuff. On the continent itself, I mentioned all the flights before. And then thanks to recent innovations like from Brittany Schmidt, who's in the audience, and an EC50 honoree from earlier today, it's actually possible now to drill through the ice right at the beginning of where the ice meets the ocean and deploy autonomous vehicles like what Brittany has. But there's still this gap in the middle, and that's where all that heat from the ocean goes to the ice. So before we can understand what's going on in that place, we can't validate our models, and therefore we have no idea when our models are going to be right or not. So that brings us to part 2, which is, okay, what can we do now with technologies that exist and platforms that exist to get something in this blind spot? Thwaites Glacier is called the Doomsday Glacier in the news. It's the most rapidly retreating glacier in Antarctica, and it represents about 2 feet of sea level rise if it were all to collapse. The western half, it's hard to see in the image a little bit, but the western half, oh great, it has collapsed. Between 2012 and 2016, it collapsed. And so these, if you look closely, those are a bunch of icebergs that are sort of trapped in there. And then this is the part of the grounding line that's retreating the most rapidly. So like that's the spot, that's the front line of sea level rise from Thwaites Glacier. The eastern half hasn't collapsed yet. And that's an open question, why? You know, the ocean conditions are about the same for the two halves of this glacier. So the South Korean program leaves from New Zealand because they have a logistical hub there. It takes about 11 days to get to Thwaites Glacier, 2,700 nautical miles. And I just want to take you there so you can see what is it like to study the Doomsday Glacier. That's the Arione again. This is just a time lapse showing what it's like during the ice breaking phase. There's about 3 days of ice breaking after we get there. This is just what it looks like, drinking the coffee, looking off the side of the ship. Local wildlife. Seals actually became a surprise teammate in this project this last year. Some cool air-to-air footage between the 2 helicopters flying to our target site. This is an image in one of the rifts. Like I showed you that image between, the glacier has collapsed. So flying to a target site, this is what it looks like just with an iPhone out the side window. This is what I would call an easy target for getting data. It's big. This is a difficult target, but this one's important because it's closer to the grounding line. So this is where the action is, right? So we really want data from places like that. The way we do it is we extract sensors from these tubes, fill the tubes with heavy objects, in this case, mooring shackles, because that's what was available at the time when we discovered we had to do this. So we called those things Shackleton bombs because of that. So after the Shackleton bomb makes a hole, we put the sensor that was in the tube on a rope, and then talking with the pilot, I'll just say, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, and then I try to get this sensor in that hole that we made with the Shackleton bomb. You can kind of see one of the unsuccessful bombs laying there. The rope stays behind for safety reasons. Then we get back to the ship and repeat the next day. So I'll go quickly here because we don't have a lot of time, but on the left in that map, you can see melt rates are represented by the red to blue colors. So it's melting more rapidly over here. The purple, or the pink dots, represent where we've deployed and recovered good data using this technique. And when you look at the top, this is from north to south, A to A prime. And what's interesting is with the dashed lines, you can tell that it's getting warmer closer to the ice. So the profiles farther to the north look like every profile ever collected around Thwaites Glacier. But as you get closer to the ice, it's warmer, shallower, which obviously has implications for how fast the ice is going to melt. So the question is, why is that happening? So these 2 plots down here have a black line that represents the meltwater mixing line. So any data that plots along that line or close to that line has some meltwater in it, some fraction. The profiles all from the north all group together like the image on the left. And there's this gap in here where you don't have a lot of meltwater. Well, when you look at the profiles that are closer to the ice, then that gap gets filled up, a lot of meltwater. So cool, all right, there might be a meltwater feedback. You melt the ice brings deeper warm water vertically up, causes more melt, and this continues, right? So there's a feedback. Unfortunately, there's multiple types of meltwater in Antarctica. This cartoon sort of shows what I'm saying here. So you have stratified deep warm water that comes in, and it's able to be warm and deep because it's salty, therefore more dense. It comes into contact with meltwater, and it sort of curves upwards, drives more melt. Problem is, we have numerical models now, very unvalidated models, but models nonetheless that are based in physical reality, that shows there's subglacial freshwater, ancient water that's melted beneath the glacier, huge area, Texas-sized areas, right? Collects this water and it flows to the coast, it enters the ocean, and should drive additional melt. The problem is the data we have so far and that we can collect can't discriminate between those different types of meltwater. So, but you can do that. But the way you do it usually requires a ship and all of its capabilities, and typically giant rosettes like this with water bottles. And the way you do it is you capture samples of the ocean, take them back to the lab, put them through a mass spectrometer, and you can find the signatures of different meltwater types. So the challenge is, how do we get that capability into the rifts? So that brings us to the last section on innovation and really what we use the impact grant support to work on. So our idea is to use a helicopter to pick up an autonomous lab, punch through the ice instead of using the Shackleton bombs, use the thing to actually break the ice, then command it from anywhere in the world over a Starlink satellite link, which allows the science payload to go into the water. It needs to automatically stop at the seafloor using a little altimeter. And then on its way back up, it needs to close water bottles and capture those samples for later analysis. we didn't have a lot of time to build the prototype, but we really wanted to for this last expedition because we wanted to be really ready for the next expedition in 2025 to use this thing in like a production sense. So in about a year, we went from cartoon on the left to a couple different engineering designs to a functional prototype, which you see on the right. So this thing is basically the most beautiful ship you've ever seen, obviously. It can float. It's got this rosette in the middle with the water bottles and several sensors. And this is a special moment because this was the first end-to-end satellite-commanded, fully autonomous ocean profile without any human intervention. So you see it descending. This was a pretty shallow profile in this case. It pops back up and latches, and it's ready to get picked up again. So while we were on the Arion, it was a unique opportunity because we're in the relevant environment, and we're with the helicopters, we're doing our other work. So we decided to go ahead and do a test flight as well. And this was important because we thought we designed it in a way that it wouldn't spin uncontrollably and be a problem for the pilot. But you really never know until you test. So there you can see the hook picking up. RIFDOX is the name of the system, the Recoverable Ice Fracture Ocean Explorer. So you can see Dominic, our pilot, flying away with it. All that sort of tan material is just flotation. And so the big test, is it going to spin uncontrollably, or is it going to fly somewhat gracefully, or at least gracefully enough for Dominic? And what you see here is the most dramatic motion we saw in the GoPro footage. It sort of rocks, oscillates, and then doesn't turn over, it just goes back the other way. And so when Dominic landed, he said, all good. No additions necessary. So we brought lots of things. We brought sail material. We brought drogue parachutes. We were ready in case something bad happened. Wheels didn't break, which was a relief too. We had shock-absorbing casters, if you can believe it or believe that. There's a website called shockabsorbingcasters.com. Just stuck them on there. So, this is the end of the talk, but I want to show every site that we've been able to access Thwaites. And remember, before we were there with the helicopter, there had never been any data collected in this melting part of this most important glacier in Antarctica. And so we've come up with a way to do it. Like, we can access this place for the first time. So what do we do with that? Obviously, for that hypothesis about the meltwater, we need to go back. We've got to get the water samples because that will have a direct influence on our sea level rise predictions today, right? We need that. But then what do? You've got this approach. So working with my colleague Elizabeth Widener, who's going to be at the University of Connecticut soon, she specializes in active broadband acoustics. So you can actually image the environment on the way down. You could even calculate melt rates directly that way. If you deploy multiple platforms like this, you can navigate other platforms. And this is, I think, where it gets really interesting, is that RIFDOX can become kind of like an under-ice GPS for autonomous vehicles to come in, and you can reconstruct trajectories for passive vehicles or even actively navigate vehicles someday. So thank you again for your support. I really appreciate it. And thanks for hanging around for the talk.
Hi, thank you so much for your research, and I loved your piece in The New Yorker. Just to preface this question, I'm a climate justice activist, and one of the investors in my climate justice company is convinced, he's a physicist, and he's convinced that sea level rise is coming from the oceans getting warmer and the size of the water molecules expanding, and I'm really curious about your thought on that.
Great question. In fact, if I had more time, I have a slide about sea level rise budget. We effectively have 6 to 9 meters of easy sea level that can come from the whole world: Antarctica, Greenland, ocean thermal expansion, and mountain glaciers. The last time sea level rose, about 130,000 years ago, above present levels, it didn't contribute more than half a meter. Ocean thermal expansion didn't contribute more than half a meter to that rise. So yes, ocean thermal expansion is important, and so are mountain glaciers, so is Greenland. But far and away, the biggest contributor to our expected sea level rise over the next few hundred years is Antarctica. But it's definitely, that ocean thermal expansion is part of the predictions for sure. So thank you for your question.
I did also have a question. Sorry, I feel like I'm hogging the microphone and asking everything, but it's not really a scientific question, it's a silly little question, but you had mentioned that one of the tools you used was like breaking the ice to like get to where you want to be. And I just like thought, had you seen that any of the tools that you use or how to get to the area, since Antarctica is like very unexplored and we don't really know exactly what's going on, did it have any negative impacts to the actual environment? Like you being there collecting the data, that's very important, but did you notice that you being there had any negative impacts as well?
That's a great question. In fact, it's one of the reasons we want to build rift docks, because it's recoverable. The whole idea is you can put it there, get better data, and then take it back to the ship. So this is something on our minds. But specifically your question about the Shackleton bombs and their impact. So the original device that normally you don't dissect it and take the instrument out. Normally you throw the whole thing out of an aircraft. And so it's been designed for the environment, right? In fact, we get environmental permits to deploy those things. So when we did this whole deconstruction exercise, we were debating, well, what do we do to make them heavier? And this was why we decided to use mooring shackles. They were available, but also they're designed to go in the ocean as well and sort of minimize the impact. So we're trying to use materials that are intended for the environment, but we still don't love the idea of leaving things behind, which is what's driving this innovation need. We really want to put this expendable sensor thing out of business. Like, it's useful, and it's currently what we can do, and it's currently what will be funded, by the way, by the funding agencies, because it's low risk, despite the New Yorker article, the way it made it sound. But like the technology is low risk, but it's, you're leaving things behind, and that's not good.
So that does conclude our program. I do want to bring our grantees up for a photo, and if we could raise the screen. In closing statement, I think one of the big takeaways, and I'm loving hearing all the questions from grantees to other grantees. We've come a long way as a club. I mean, I think back to the history, probably over 100 years ago, Cook and Peary were basically beating each other up over who made it to the North Pole first. And now we have such an amazing, folks coming.
I can just talk loud. Folks coming from all around the world, speaking different languages, different fields of study, and really like collaborating in beautiful and incredible ways. And that's like what our flag stands for. That's what our organization stands for, is curiosity, knowledge, and collaboration. So thank you so much to all our grantees who really embody that in all their work. So if all the grantees could come up for a photo, definitely Emerald and Rebecca as well.